Hey everybody, welcome to the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson, and we are starting with our second critique group here on the Crit House. This time we are talking to photo educators, and we have just this fantastic group of people that I'm so pleased have agreed to join us here for these conversations. Dan Milnor, up the left-hand side on my screen, but he is a creative evangelist for Blurb Books. He is a fantastic photographer, former journalist. We have Alex Kilbee, who is here with us as well. Also somebody I learned from YouTube and his fantastic YouTube channel, which looks at photography as an art form. He was a 30-year professional photographer and is now changing the world of photography in a lot of ways on YouTube. It's true. Suzanne Revy in the lower right-hand side is here with us. Suzanne is a landscape photographer. She works here in the Boston area. She's a landscape photographer among other things as well, but she is an educator, a writer. She has a BFA from the Pratt Institute, and she has worked both in editorial and magazine publishing as a photography editor for places like US News and World Report and Yankee Magazine. It's great to have you, Suzanne. Thanks for joining us. And Erin Carey, whose photography we're going to talk about today, has joined us as well. She also artist, educator, and she has a BA from Sarah Lawrence and an MFA from Tufts University, still works in the education and as a photographer as well. And I will say the reason that this group is together is because I am interested in hearing educators talk about photography. The things that I have learned from all of you is because of your eloquence and your insight. But I don't see like a lot of your work. And so now we have the opportunity to both see your work, talk about your work, and learn from it as well. So again, thanks for joining us. Erin, let's talk about your photography.
The project that I submitted for everybody to kind of take a look at and for us to talk about is called A Spring That Love Remembered. It is, I guess maybe it's 5 to 6 years ongoing now, project. It's shot on a point and shoot Olympus 35 millimeter camera. It stems from, I think hopefully a lot of educators here tonight will like have probably similar experience. But as an educator, a photo educator, I think there's moments where you go through iterations of not making a lot of work because you give so much of yourself creatively to your students and to that crit space and the time in the classroom. And so I think I was coming out of a period of having been, defining myself as a large format color photographer. And I had sort of had like these 2 really big bodies of work under my belt. And I sort of was like taking a breather. And in taking a breather, I sort of went back to reading a lot of poetry, and I was sort of delving into sort of literary works. And then simultaneously on a personal level, I had experienced in a short period of time, like simultaneously 3 family deaths that I think, as I was approaching, like mid to upper 30s, I was having a moment of like that next stage of adulthood, like when Plato or Aristotle talk about like adulthood in phases, I had come out of like that second or third thing. And it was like, wow, I'm moving into that middle time. And so A Spring That Love Remembered is I like to describe it as it's a psychological winter and then the reawakening into the spring. So literally we go through the seasons across multiple years. I'm photographing with this point and shoot camera that I'm carrying with me on my person at all times. Most of the work in the project is photographed while I'm alone in a car or a train space. So there's this sort of microcosm, macrocosm of this like small interior world that I live in as I'm moving through literal winter into spring, but then also sort of processing what it means to be losing people and kind of moving up in the pecking order within a family structure. And so I'm focusing on the regional landscape, places that I walk daily. I'm also focusing on certain rites and, that belong to like the seasonal rites belonging to a place, the syrup pilgrimage, the apple picking in the fall, the closing down of the camp in the summer. So I'm kind of like focusing on these things. They're relatively quiet and contemplative. So in terms of what I'm interested to get out of it, I'd like to hear for people like, I'm curious about the emotional tone. If you're feeling like there's a continuity of travel across time. I'm interested if the presence of children at the end, if you find that, if that's working, that's relatively new. The pictures of children being in the edit are new.
Okay, Erin, that's great. I want to I will let folks put their 2 cents in. I stopped on this image for a little bit. I just love this tree.
I love it too, and that's the reason I photographed it. So much about what happens in the project is about building a relationship to place, right? That you can drive by this little thing as a sumac as it grows up and like has a presence, and therefore it has weighted meaning in a way that something so silly like a weed shouldn't, but it does.
Well, I know that doesn't relate to what you were asking for, but
No,
I love this. I wanted to make that point. So Dan Milnor, you talk a lot about on your channel about reading and literature and the importance of that, and Erin was talking a little bit about that as well. Whether that relates to your input, I don't know, but let's start with you.
Do you know how terrifying it is to hear someone identify me with a YouTube channel? That's I am the world's worst YouTuber, and it makes me laugh every time I hear that. But it's really interesting, and I think yes, writing definitely. When I looked at this work and I made four notes about this work. The second was it's a quiet poetic body of work that deserves a quiet poetic copy, and I don't know if poetry is in the equation for this project, but it seems like it's very fitting in my mind. The overall impression that I took from this work was this was a project, and again, I don't know if this is wholly accurate, but it was a project about love and loss. And I found that the third point I made was the middle distance spacing of the work felt like the photographer was emotionally caught between dark and light, good and evil, joy and pain, that there was almost two parallel narratives happening here, and that the human images served as a bit of relief from the non-human images. And the non-human images had a consistency of barriers between the main subjects, fences, railings, trees. And I found that there was like this back and forth play. So the answer to your question for me with the kids' work, I think it does work because it's providing a sense of a seasonal transition. But when I think about seasonal transition, I think about the emotional swings that come with coming out of something like winter into something like spring, especially in a place where these images are taken, which looks like a place that definitely has 4 seasons. And so I think it does work. But that's, to me, the feeling that I got, where there were two narratives here playing off of one another, that there was something, I don't know, a loss that had happened, or something that made me feel like you were trying to attach, but then part of the catharsis of the project were these pictures of the kids in spring, counterbalancing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you feel like anything, like in looking at the project, are there any like emotional notes or tones or things that like play like a wrong key for you?
Give me another.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, like when I look at work, when I create, like I'm fairly happy to have somebody say to me, hey, this picture, like it just doesn't work for me. So if there were any outliers in there where you feel like this one really sticks out, it's like a sore thumb, or it doesn't have the same emotional resonance that the others have, I'd love to have you say to me, hey, like, you know what, I would pull 1, 5, and 7. Or so if there were any in there, I'd be interested to hear what you thought they were.
Well, I went to photojournalism school, so we can always cut things out.
Yeah.
I don't have specific notes on each individual photo, but there were images that, the strobe image of the snow with the house. I love that picture. I think it's the third one in. This one I absolutely love. Thank you. But there were not images that, I mean, I can go through and definitely, cull some images if I had to, but I'd have to make specific notes on those.
Yeah, no, that's fine, but that's helpful.
Maybe let's circle around to that, and let's let Suzanne Revy have some thoughts. I know she's eloquent.
Oh, I think I responded similarly to this as Daniel. This is work that feels deeply personal, also a little bit mysterious, and I feel like you're allowing us into your psychological space. I mean, everything that you sort of described. I understand the work now much better too, but I found it very, very moving, and it actually reminded me a little bit of a mentor of mine from when I was at Pratt, Phil Perkis, his work, which is high praise in my mind. And I would look at his work for inspiration.
Thank you. Yeah,
his work is subtle and when I was a student of his, I didn't understand his work at all. I didn't get it at all. And then when I was older, I suddenly realized just how extraordinary it was. The one that to me takes me a little bit out of the emotional resonance is the girl with the pool on the patio.
Okay.
For some reason, I don't know why, that one just feels like a more literal picture than, and maybe the boy with the bubbles. Like this girl is fine, not her, the other one.
It's the same girl at 3 years later. So that's part of like but you can't tell that. So that's useful information for me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah. So this one was an outlier for you.
A little bit. I think tonally it felt a little different.
Okay.
You know, I mean, maybe that's what it kind of came down to, was the content of the picture, which I sort of consider to be, you know, the tones you're using. It's just lighter. And although I appreciate the sentiment of moving from sort of a dark winterscape to this more summery kind of image, but at the same time, I feel like there's some other hierarchy pictures that are still retain that melancholy that this one doesn't quite, for whatever reason, doesn't quite have. I don't think it's a bad photograph. It just feels a little different from the other ones.
Yeah.
So other than that, I think this is just a really strong body of work. And I think at some point, I hope you find a way to get it into a small monograph, you know, and I don't think it needs a lot of accompanying verbiage, you know, I mean, a few poems maybe, but I do like this sense of, I mean, I don't know, maybe a diaristic, and you're going back and photographing things, right? Like the sumac tree at the end, or not.
Oh, it's so funny you say that. Well, can you ask the question in a different way? So I'll just describe it to you. So like I drive by it regularly. So like some things I photograph multiple times until like the picture actually occurs. So that goes through different iterations, that sumac, until like it regrows or they chop it down. Yeah.
Right. And then, so you finally got the picture that you wanted. So once you have that, you don't go back to that sumac.
Oh, I might still photograph it again. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got that thing going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting, like sort of returning to places, photographing them over time in different light. All of that, I think, can add to the expression of a photograph and the whole body of work. So this is really nicely done, Erin. I think you're doing a really good job, and so different from your color work. You know, it's surprising.
I appreciate that. And, you know, one of the other questions I have for the group, and you brought it up by way of your feedback, Suzanne, was you said you hoped it makes its way possibly into a small monogram. And that was the question I had for people, was like, do you feel that work like this, like I'm thinking about how I want to bring this to people, because it is deeply personal. It is a personal narrative, and the book experience is dramatically different than the wall experience, right? Or a website. And that was on my mind, is like, possibly this is the right type of project for a small book. You know, when I look at book projects that sort of similarly, I was thinking about like Tomatoes on the Back Porch by Susan Paulson as like another really small, intimate body of work that, you know, it's a delicate little book with, you know, small plates where you can sit with it over and over and over and turn the pages. And I think like that's currently what my thinking is around this work. So I'd also like to hear from people what people think about that.
So let's have Alex. You've been very patient, and I will say for the audience, just so you know, Alex it's the middle of the night for him across the pond, and as over the next 5 weeks, as we're watching this video, we're going to watch him get more and more tired as we go along.
Progression of me sort of falling over.
So Alex, what's your thought about all of the things that we've just been talking about?
There's sort of two things that sort of leap to mind. Erin, you mentioned about, you know, the format that this would ultimately take, and you talked about like a small monograph or some sort of small book format, and I feel that's probably not a bad direction to go with. And in counterpoint to what Suzanne was saying about these images not needing an awful lot of verbiage, I feel that they probably would benefit, certainly from my perspective, having some sort of your personal thoughts attached to them. This is the kind of photography that a lot of people will look at and go, yeah, I don't get it. It's, you know, they're just snapshots, for want of a better word. And having it in a format where you can put your personal fingerprints, not just on the images, but also in your emotional states. I think it would make people connect with the images certainly deeper. I'm looking at these and I don't have a cultural point of reference to look at these or anything like that. This is all fairly foreign to me, so I can't tap into your feelings. I can't hear cicadas in the background and all that sort of stuff that was come naturally. So it would be handy to have something just to tie it together. I think just from a person who has no connection with this at all, and that would probably make it feel like it's a little bit more cohesive, because at the moment for me I know you talk about like this progression sort of from death to sort of winter and spring, and I think because are these all fairly local places to you?
They're regional to New England, and they happen during travel. Yeah, so I know them fairly well, the routes. Okay,
because I sort of look at it because it seems like there's lots of different subjects that you quite are drawn to, like this kind of the sort of the slightly sort of rundown farmhouses and trees and all those kind of things, but it does occasionally feel like it jumps around. You asked earlier about one image that doesn't seem to fit, and I know people have sort of gravitated towards the girl on the porch with the thing, but number 17, the splash on the shorefront, this seems completely off kilter with everybody else, probably because everything else has a more of a rural feel to it.
Okay, interesting.
Whereas this feels like it's more urban,
seasonal, and therefore like tourist.
I'm seeing the buildings in the background. Everything is just, if you look at like the images that follow, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, those feel, rural. They feel often, like a little, I don't want to say backwater, but this sort of thing. And the other one just feels like a tourist area.
Well, it's interesting feedback that Alex gave, because I actually hadn't really considered that before. Is you have I know New England, and I know what it is. And Dan at the moment is in New England, although he's not from here, he has some knowledge of it. Suzanne certainly has been here for a long time, but you get somebody who comes from the outside, doesn't sort of understand the cultural context of the imagery. That's interesting feedback. I will say there's one image for me that is that I had, like this one right here. I don't know why. Maybe it's the way it's sort of out of focus. I don't mind out of focus. Is what?
Out of focus.
Yeah, it's out of focus. I don't mind out of focus per se, but for some reason this one's it feels mistakey out of focus. As opposed to as to being more intentional.
Is that a technical term?
I'm not the educator here. I'm the one who does. So probably not.
Mistakey. It's a new one. I'm writing that down.
I tell you something, Erin. Jeff, just go up to number 7 for me, please, quickly. Initially, Erin, when I saw this, I was like, okay, what? What? But this image is actually starting to grow on me a lot.
Oh, I like this one a lot.
I don't know why. There's something obviously vaguely eerie about it. And there's just it if you compare that, like also with number 4, the what looks like a parking lot, that sense of emptiness, sort of like a kind of sort of feel. It just feels, the more that I sit with this, it more kind of puts me in a sort of a Ralph Eugene Meat Yard kind of vibe, maybe because it's the thing.
Meat Yard marries Robert Adams kind of in.
It's a meaty Adams. It is interesting, but I think that's going back to the original point about having a book, with images on the wall or on the screen and stuff. It's easy to just kind of just move on to the next one. Whereas obviously with a book, you do flick back and forth as we're doing here, rather than just walking in a progression past images on a wall, waiting for one of them to kind of reach out and say, hello, spend some time with me.
That's true. I appreciate that, Alex. I think also, especially the fact that you said eerie. The idea of the uncanny was part of that for me, was that I was quite literally alone traveling all the time, and that as I was processing all these feelings, that I felt like there were these magical interventions. Sometimes they were a sliver of light. You know, I would see something, you know, like from a moving train, that like this, for example, you know, like somebody tending their garden as I'm flying through the suburbs at 60 miles an hour in this train. And so I started to feel like there were reminders somehow out there that I, you know, while the pictures might be empty, quite literally empty, of quiet places, that I wasn't alone. So that sort of like eeriness, presence of something otherworldly started happening. So I'm glad that you sort of feel that a little bit in the pictures, especially at the beginning. I feel like it goes away as we move into the body of work. I'm aware of that myself. I'm not sure if you guys feel that.
Dan Milnor, you started us off with some thoughts. You had some time to think about it. We've all been sort of chatting away. And we said we'd come back maybe to your thoughts about which images may be able to be moved out. What are your thoughts there?
I love to Alex's point, the image number 4, I think, the child in the window in the front. I love that picture. Oh. I do like the eeriness in front. It's interesting to me that there's one vertical photograph in the whole thing, which is 10, image 10, which is, I don't know, it's not my favorite image. And I'm just curious how that worked in there. But I also wanted to mention too about the book side of it. I think most photo projects I see deserve to be in small books. I think the days of the big book are rapidly winding down, not just for economic reasons, but because of how photography is viewed now. I think a lot of people are aiming for those books without the right kind of work. But to me, having a small book, an intimate book with a body of work like this is even more important. And so publishing a book like this in 100 or 200 copies, especially because it's such a personal book, it's not intended for a massive audience by any means. And I think placing this book in certain collections would be a good idea. And I think doing a small, quiet book that has a very personal bend to it, which is probably not something that a lot of publishers are going to be able to do, could be something that you could do on your own. But I think it plays well into the book format. And it doesn't need a tremendous amount outside of these pictures. It just needs a little bit of personal written connection as to what we're looking at. And then again, maybe some poems. But yeah, there's not much I would cut out of it. And I look at this picture of the seaside, and again, I've been in New England just enough times to realize why this may work in the publication. Yeah. But I get why Alex looked at it and said, look, this, you know, it looks like an urban image. To me, I see this, and when I see the wave come up, but it's paired with the clothing that the person is wearing, which ties it very much to this place.
So he touched on real briefly the vertical image here as being related. So when I saw this, I thought this was like an apparition. There was something ghost-like about this, and that's when you were talking about what this meant and the passing of the people in your life, that it sort of struck me as representative of that. But that was my piece. I can certainly.
That's spot on.
But can I just say one thing a little bit about the sequence that you've done here? Like we have this vertical with this sort of apparition, and then 2 pictures later, there's another weird apparition. And then weirdly, again, I think, you know, several images later where we're at the seaside, you know, that water and that sort of brightness in the middle there, you know, I like that it's coming back every few pictures. Like you're sort of presenting a little bit of a rhythm there that I think is interesting, you know, and then things become a little more grounded, like this, you know, which I think is a pretty solid sequence right now.
Thank you. I've been working that sequence off and on for months, so I appreciate you saying that, because I wanted it to feel like winter to spring to summer and back again, so that it was sort of like a never-ending cycle.
Right.
So thank you. Well.
I know we can go on for a long period of time. Erin, did you have just any like final thought about just your response to what we've talked about?
You know, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody, because I haven't trusted that many people with the work so far. So it's nice to be able to share this with people who are thoughtful educators. And I appreciate all of the feedback from all of you. It gives me things to think about and kind of like confirms for me some of my suspicions and some of my own thoughts about the work. Yeah, so I'm really excited to have shared this with you, and I appreciate your time.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it, and certainly want to thank you very much and thank all of us for participating here. Dan Milnor, greatly appreciated to be on the Crit House. Same with you, Alex Kilbee, Suzanne Revy, and Erin Carey. It's been great seeing you work. I do want to say that Erin is on the board of the Griffin Museum, and wanted to make sure I mentioned that the Griffin has recently celebrated their 30th birthday. And they are now launching their first capital campaign this summer called Picturing the Future. They're raising funds for facilities improvements and in support of launching an artist residency program as well. And so I will put a link to that in case you are interested in supporting and helping out. Thank you all for being on the Crit House. Thank you all for watching the Crit House.